Welcome to this edition of Inside the Academy Studio.
Today's conversation will be about David O. Russell's American Hustle. American Hustle is an original screenplay by Eric Singer and David O. Russell, and it tells the story of Irving Rosenfeld, played by Christian Bale, a con man extraordinaire in the late 1970s, early 80s, New York, New Jersey, who basically creates a money laundering business, but is eventually joined by an equally competent con person in Sidney Prosser, played by Amy Adams. The two of them create their firm, London Associates, but eventually the FBI catches up on their dealings, and the FBI and the lead FBI agent, in this case played by Bradley Cooper, force them to cooperate with the FBI in a larger scheme to take down some notable politicians in the area. And what follows is a movie full of many hijinks and turns, and it's loosely based on the AB scam conducted by the FBI in the late 70s and 80s. I'm going to bring in my co-host now. David O. Russell, for the second year in a row and third year in 4 years, has been recognized by the Academy for one of his films, and another film that has a huge acting ensemble that is doing really quality work. And in this case, he leaned heavily on improvisation. Now, how has David O. Russell been so effective in basically controlling his actors and still coming up with a resemblance of a narrative picture?
I think it's because his actors really respond to the type of direction he gives. I mean, giving an actor improvisation means you're giving an actor a full reign to really be the role rather than just be part of the role. You can definitely see that with Christian Bale, who commonly does it with any movie he plays it, whether it be Batman, whether it be The Illusionist. Actually, no, that was The Prestige. But you know what I mean, right? Christian Bale is the type of actor who really gets into a role, and Amy Adams is well known for acting. I mean, these are all already well-established actors, but you're giving them even more reign over their characters. I think a character knows where he fits within a story, right?
I think that's a good point. Improvisation in a more, less experienced actor could go awfully wrong, but when you cast such quality actors and those that have experience with it, like Christian Bale, there's less room for error, even if don't have the path set out in advance. Now, a lot of people I've read said that American Hustle had great character pieces, a lot of great character chewing scenes, but really wasn't driven by a plot that kind of carried the movie, where the plot was secondary. Do you agree with those comments? And what do you think the balance was in terms of plot to character moments?
I can see the plot. It's definitely not a movie that's going to be remembered for its plot. I mean, coming out of this movie, the first thing I remembered was Jennifer Lawrence's performance, just because it really got the audience in the theater really excited and really happy for any line she said. But I still think it's not a bad plot, because it's not like there's scenes that go off the actual main plot and have nothing to do with that eventual ending. I mean, every scene in this movie, I think, leads up to another scene in this movie. So while it may not be a tightly plotted feature, it's not like a Gravity this year. It's still a feature that has characters play within a story, and I think it achieves what it wants to do.
Yeah, I think some character moments are much bigger than others. I agree. Any moment with Jennifer Lawrence seems much bigger than any other, moment in the story. But even those scenes have a place in the film, and they eventually lead these characters down that path. So it's not totally plot void, but the plot is not very important. It's just sort of kind of a guideline, and that kind of goes back to the improvisation style of Russell.
Okay, speaking of the plot, right away this movie starts with the line, "Some of this actually happened," indicating that, yes, this was based on a true story loosely, but it's not necessarily a true story. Now, do you think this absolves the script from any sort of respect for historical accuracy, or is that still an important consideration to make when for a lot of the audience, it's the first time they're hearing about such an issue? So I think it may influence what they think of this. So do you think that's important, or do you think it's up to the audience to make their own decisions because of this tagline?
I think it's up to the audience. I don't think it totally absolves Russell and Singer from not setting the tone of what the ab scam was. And I think they kind of get to that point where, you had politicians, and the most notable one in this one, Carmine, played by Jeremy Renner, were in some ways seen as good public figures, but obviously they had to deal or had to handle more of the gray or black issues in politics. And so they kind of set the tone, whereas, obviously the facts are not the same. These characters are totally made up in many ways, but I think the tone of the ab scam is there in part, and I think it's up to the audience I think it's very similar to Argo last year. The guideline is there in terms of, okay, this actually happened. Now it's up to you to kind of find out what actually happened.
Now, I'm glad you mentioned Argo, because Argo is not presented in that way. Argo is presented as the truth that the media didn't present, right? So I think a lot of the audience that were familiar with the story before took Argo as more fact because they thought it was more of the behind-the-scenes look.
And I just put that in a difference where Russell doesn't take himself too seriously in the plots and the settings and the details of his films, where Ben Affleck takes himself very seriously. So I think that's a difference right there.
Oh, yeah, and I think that definitely, and you see that in the tone. I think people watching American Hustle, I think we'll see that as like, okay, some of this is exaggerated to be more funny, right? It wasn't exactly like this. I mean, this is still serious issues about political corruption and crime, right? So of course it's not going to come out exactly like a true story. So I think that's a good point.
Knowing that it's not entirely factual, actually not factual at all, but do you think the point of view on what modern audiences have compared to the setting of the film, the 70s, 80s, has that significantly changed? Do we still view criminals and lawmakers and policemen in the same angle? Because I think definitely it seemed to be very pro for the Bale and Adams characters. They were the heroes. We rooted for them. Is that kind of something that we are now just immune to? Like, we think the fact that no politician or no lawmaker can be totally honest, so we kind of gravitate towards those who are already presented as being criminal?
Oh, yeah, and I think it was a scene early in the movie that still resonates today, where Christian Bale's character talks about his father and how he was shook down by honest business practices and how he wanted to change that. And I think a lot of people today really can relate to that, because they feel like they've been working so hard their entire life and they're not getting their fair share. And I think any character who goes out there and makes the opportunities for themselves, whether it be in these morally ambiguous ways, will still get rooted for in the end.
Okay. We've already talked about a lot of the styles of directing and the improvisation, and that comes down, obviously, to a large part what the actors can do. And for a second year in a row, a Russell film has seen the Academy honor it with 4 nominations in each of the acting slots. So I want to talk about the actors briefly, and I think we've touched upon Jennifer Lawrence already. But when I watched this film in theaters, Jennifer Lawrence was getting the biggest attention, the biggest laughs. People were tuned into her performance. She basically admitted to saying that she based it on a kind of a Real Housewives of Long Island. It was a bigger than life portrayal. And I think it was, Jennifer Lawrence, until I guess last year, Silver Linings was a bit more, bigger than normal. But before that, she's been able to play more of those reserved characters in The Winter's Bone. How did you view her larger than life portrayal as the jilted housewife?
Yeah, I think she achieves what they wanted out of the role, to bring out the humor, like you said, in the role. But on the other side, I could see one thing that you don't see, and is that her character is being cheated on by Irving for this entire movie. So, of course, she'd be a little hysterical and angry about this entire situation.
Yeah, I also liked how her character the piece you couldn't control. Because so often in these caper films that everything is so perfect that nothing, these con men are so efficient at their job that nothing goes wrong. But here you have Rosalind, someone that Irving cannot control in any sense, someone that Amy Adams' character cannot control in any sense. So that's kind of the wild card that kind of, adds that wrinkle halfway through the story that keeps the con premise very fresh. Speaking about Amy Adams, she's, considered more of the America's sweetheart role, and she's never played a kind of a risque or a temptress role. And in this case, she is basically the circle or the center of attention for both Bradley Cooper and Christian Bale. How does she transform into this kind of temptress, or have we just not noticed that she had this in her previously?
I think we didn't notice she had this in her previously. I think her role in The Fighter was not too dissimilar. I mean, she played a rough around the edges character, trying to move on from the life she had right now. And I think her American Hustle role is not too much of a departure from that. I mean, Amy Adams, she's not that young. But she exudes youthful exuberance in some of her movies, such as, of course, Enchanted. So I think it wasn't too much of a stretch for her in this role.
Okay. Obviously, when you set a film in the 70s and 80s, you have to feel right. And in this case, the Academy has rightfully honored the costume designer, Michael Wilkinson. And we have to comment on the makeup and the hair. They're definitely set to tone and is some of the, I think, the best parts of the film, if you agree.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And changing gears a little bit, the character who already kind of looks like he's from the 70s is Louis C.K.'s character, because Louis C.K. already has like the bald head, glasses and everything. And I just want to briefly mention that character for a bit. He's a character who is definitely a supporting role, but I think when I watched that movie, I took a lot out from what he said in the movie, where he tries to retain Bradley Cooper's Richie character, try to get him by the book, more procedural based. And in the end, he turns out to be kind of right. I mean, in the end, Richie ends up getting conned by Cindy and Irving. So do you think this movie is almost a little bit apologetic for the procedures that police work has to follow, rather than, okay, everything should be off book and we should try to beat the con men at their own game?
I don't think it explicitly tries. In the end, you take the lesson where the con men do win. Okay, I think it was just, I don't think police procedure outdoes the con men, because in the end, Christian Bale and Amy Adams are allowed to live their lives. So in many ways, I think it has to be that delicate balance of proper police procedure, but then you also need that creative, almost CIA ability to foster and get reliable intelligence. So in this case, I think it's the character and the procedure that's left out to dry is the Richie character by Bradley Cooper, not necessarily a ploy back to saying that the police and what they did from day one is the right thing. I think it's one cop is way off base instead of that the entire institution was right in the first place. We're almost nearing the end of this edition of Inside the Academy Studio, and like always, we like to end with some certain questions. So I ask, what was your favorite moment in American Hustle?
My favorite moment was a very brief scene when Robert De Niro makes his appearance as the mobster Victor Taleggio, because I think it really, really shows how art imitates life. Robert De Niro is at the point in his career where he doesn't care absolutely what he does. So when he does appear, he's like, forget you, I'm Robert De Niro. And I think that really was such a simple thing to show just by Robert De Niro's appearance, that, all right, this is Robert De Niro. You got to stop what you're doing. You got to really pay attention during this scene. And I think it really achieved what David O. Russell wanted from the scene, just because he had Robert De Niro.
Well, my favorite moment was the running gag with the Louis C.K. character and the Bradley Cooper character, where Louis C.K. is trying to tell the story of his brother, and it keeps getting interrupted by the impatience of Bradley Cooper. I think it kind of sets the tone what we were talking about between the old ways of policing and the new ways of policing. But it was one of the more funnier parts, and the payoff near the end, what Bradley Cooper eventually does to the Louis C.K. character, is worth the wait. Okay, your least favorite moment in American Hustle?
I think my least favorite moment is the very explicit ending of where Irving and Sydney have their happy ending where they own an art gallery at the end. I think that you didn't need to really show all that because you already knew that these two characters were appreciated the art so much. So I assumed if they were going to end up together that they were probably going to do something along those lines. I don't think I needed to know the entire 100% full story of how they're going to live their lives for live their life for the rest of their days.
I'm going to go back to slightly just before that in the final scheme they pull over Richie, the Bradley Cooper character. I felt it was almost too clean. We had spent an hour and a half showing that how these two Adams and Bale's characters had become so intertwined and so messy that they couldn't be the magnificent or the marvelous conman anymore. But in the end, it seemed like, hey, nothing had changed. They were able to go in and pull out quickly and get the job done. And so I would have maybe liked a more messier ending. It seemed too much of a victory in one way based on where we had seen these characters go. Okay, so the last thing we do is word association. So when you think American Hustle, what word do you think of?
Chic.
Perms. So when we think of American Hustle, we think of chic and perms. That is this edition of Inside the Academy Studio.
Thank you.